Good afternoon here in Washington. Thanks to all of you for showing up. Thanks for the 30-some, I think, people online. So we have a good, relatively small crowd. Hopefully we will have a good conversation here. This is a session on early warning systems in fragile conflict and violence affected countries. If you're hoping for something else, you're in the wrong room. This conversation, I think, is growing in importance, unfortunately. There are a few examples just in the past year. Libya, of course, central part of Africa, a number of other countries where flooding overwhelms and surprised the system, and with the consequence of large numbers of loss of life and other consequences. So there's no doubt, I think, for most of you who hear that it's highly relevant. There looks to be some level of urgency. I do think we are expecting or seeing that there's a growing number of these events. We have a growing number of economic literature that indicates the value of early warning systems generally. What we don't have maybe is, I don't know that we collectively are all that good in figuring out what works. I think we have an increasing amount of understanding that maybe a more sophisticated and some could say traditional approach to hydromet value chain eventually leads to improved early warning systems that eventually helps warn someone that they need to do something different. That kind of approach, maybe not so surprisingly, does not tend to work all that well in context with weak institutions or lower capacity, sometimes conflict. So I think we have a growing amount of understanding of stuff that doesn't work. I don't know that we have learned fast enough what works, and this session essentially is an attempt, at least from the access and platform that we have collectively, to try to put our heads together, share a bit of what we have been involved in some fragile countries. We will hear about at least 4 of the bank regions, if I read the country names correctly. And through that shared experience, maybe we can start to produce ideas of how to engage further in other fragile contexts in a better way. I think the World Bank has a unique position to add this knowledge base to the world. Most other entities do not have the opportunity to engage in many fragile contexts around the world in the same year. So we almost have sort of an obligation to help the global understanding of what can be done for early warning systems in fragile contexts. Of course, with partners from ICRC, other partners that are involved in the agenda. At GFDRR, which is the unit that I manage here at the World Bank, we come at this particular problem from at least 2 angles. We have a line of work that attempts to learn how to do better disaster risk management in fragile contexts. We have another line of work that attempts to figure out how to do better early warning systems, emergency preparedness. And we have a third line of work that works on how to do better hydromet and hydromet's relation to early warning systems. So we have at least 3 different technical angles on this particular conversation. We sit in a knowledge position, if you will, trying to service teams across the World Bank and through them the clients that they are working with. Mostly in this particular topic, I think we're going to be learning from the teams on the ground. We are interested in figuring out how to help you better, understanding and accepting that the context you're operating in here is complicated. So without anything more from me, again, thanks a lot to all of you from showing up. I look forward to hear and listen to the conversation, possibly participate a bit. We are privileged to be joined by a number of distinguished speakers on our panel. World Bank practitioners, they will share their insights. We will hear from selected FCV settings, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Haiti, and Yemen. I think, unless the lineup has changed last minute. Thanks in particular, of course, to our colleagues in the FCV group and our larger pool of partners, some of whom are connected, including the Climate Center. So without further ado, I think I'm passing it over to Jan.
Thank you, Niels, and hi, everyone. My name is Bianca Adam, and I'm here representing the FCV group because we organized this event together with Karima and the team. And in the FCV group, I lead our work on crisis preparedness. We have a small program looking at crisis preparedness across different types of shocks, across sectors. So the reason why I'm excited about this conversation today is to learn from you guys, from the people who are leading technical work in FCV contexts, to see what lessons we can extract from that experience, and as Nils was saying, not just the challenges, but also how do we move forward. And to frame this work in the bigger picture, crisis preparedness is increasingly a priority at the bank. You are probably familiar with the new crisis preparedness and response toolkit that was launched, which focuses on sort of the financing side of things. But that's only one part of the equation. Crisis preparedness is multi-sectoral, and I think I'm speaking to an audience that knows this very well. And what we want to do in the FCV group is partner more and more with technical teams in the global practices and the GPs to see how we can tailor that support to specific aspects of crisis preparedness for the diverse range of FCV contexts. That's increasingly something that's becoming clear. There is not one solution that works across FCV contexts. And so it's important to partner, so technical teams to partner with FCV experts to better understand the political economy dynamics, the FCV dynamics in countries, and understand how those FCV dynamics impact our technical support on crisis preparedness, but vice versa, also how our work on crisis preparedness can impact FCV drivers of conflict, drivers of fragility. So that's something that I hope that can come out of this conversation. And then secondly, I'm excited sort of in a very opportunistic way about this conversation, because part of what my program does is roll out a diagnostic tool called the Crisis Preparedness Gap Analysis, or CPGA, that looks at country capacity to anticipate, prepare for, and manage shocks related to natural hazards, pandemics, so public health emergencies, and food crisis risks. And obviously, hydromet services, early warning systems, are a huge part of that, one of the 5 key pillars of that analysis. So we want to make sure that we learn from this deep dive, this work that Karima is leading, to inform the CPGA rollout going forward, and in our support to CMUs, to our country teams as they roll this out. But I'll stop here. Thank you very much, Karima. And to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I think that for us, the objective of the session is fairly clear. Again, we want to facilitate this in-depth discussion between the operational teams, but also with the partners that are joining us from outside of the organization to think about how we deliver effective early warning systems. And what are the best practices out there that have been proven to have worked, but also have an honest conversation about the challenges and some of the experiences that have not necessarily worked so well. So without further ado, I'm gonna hand the floor to Musa, to Lara, to Lara and Musa, to set up sort of a frame for our discussion over the next hour and a half. This is based on a work that we've been working on a study that we've been working on here at GFDRR over the past almost year now, and we're essentially crowdsourcing from all of you here ideas and thoughts about the soundness of our analysis. So, Lara.
Thanks a lot, Karima. So we wanted to start with a very short presentation to frame today's deep dive and to provide you with a little bit of background on the current trends and challenges in terms of early warning system implementation in fragile and conflict-affected environments. So maybe just taking a step back to have a look, like why are we looking at this issue today in the first place? We know that fragility, conflict, and violence pose a serious challenge to development. We also know that by 2030, up to 2/3 of the global extreme poor will be living in countries that are called FCS, so fragile and conflict states. There is also substantial overlap between countries that are affected by fragility and conflict, or conflict, and those that are the most vulnerable to environmental, climate, and disaster risks. So we have, for example, of the top 20 countries that are most vulnerable to climate change, 14 are on the World Bank FCS list, so the list that yearly defines some countries that are fragile or conflict affected. However, despite this intersection that is clear between disaster risks and FCV challenges, there is a lack of recognition in international policy frameworks and funding for preventive action in these FCV countries. Now, what about early warning systems? Early warning systems do have a role to play, a key role in addressing these challenges. They provide timely alerts and actionable information to communities ahead of a disaster event. They enable them to prepare, respond, and recover to these hazards. We know that access to early warning system could actually result in a $35 billion reduction in asset and well-being losses annually, along with, of course, notable decreases in mortality rates. So they really have the potential to significantly mitigate the financial and human toll of disasters. Keeping in mind that actually this number is coming from a very conservative approach, so the benefits are likely to be much higher than this number. Nevertheless, only half of countries worldwide are today protected by a multi-hazard early warning system as of 2023. And actually less than half of the least developed countries and only 1/3 of small islands developing states are having access to such systems. So we can only imagine that FCV countries are even lagging further behind in terms of early warning system coverage. And that is because often ongoing conflict, fragility, instability overshadows efforts for disaster resilience. And that leaves long-term resilience building efforts on the back burner. I'll pass on to Musa now to dive further into what we're working on at GFDRR for early warning system implementation in FCV countries.
Thank you very much, Lara, and hi everybody. So just to move here. So before getting into the detail of the study, I just want to come again and discuss the overall approach to early warning systems. So what early warning systems generally mean. So these systems are built upon 4 pillars that we all know as practitioners, which are disaster risk knowledge, detection, monitoring, forecasting. You have the warning and preparedness. So on the graph, you can see a more detailed 10-step value chain that was established by WMO to support the different practitioners. So these go from institutional arrangement, earth observations, up to all the community connection awareness. But the thing is, even in conventional settings, this end-to-end value chain is difficult to establish. So you can imagine what is the case in FCV settings, for instance, where institutions are fragile and when there are conflicts. So this fragility and different conflicts will exacerbate these challenges in terms of, first on the hardware, so equipment will not work as a result of underfunding. And then you also have other systemic issues resulting from the conflict, which are trust, for instance. So communities are divided. There is lack of trust into this, the forecast and the warnings. So from this traditional approach, obviously there is much needed in terms of the FCV settings. So what we are planning to do, is really to find impacts channels into this value chain. So where can we achieve higher impact? Because we cannot just stop acting in this region because of the FCV. So this is a bit the idea of it. And as mentioned, the one-size-fits-all solutions is probably not working. So there is a need to look into the different specificities of the FCV, the FCS context. So that's as part of us to try to solve these challenges, GFDRR through the Disaster-FCV Nexus and all the different thematic area, hydromet and inclusive DRM are all working on this knowledge, which will help to highlight the analytical underpinnings of what do we need to do into the FCV setting. So basically, this study is aiming at looking at the missed opportunities for failing in implementing early warning systems in FCV settings. And also, the World Bank, we are lucky to have a lot of initiatives, a lot of projects ongoing. So this study will look at how to harness all the lessons learned, innovative approaches. And also, there is another angle is to provide a decision tree or a more action-oriented tool to the task teams, and also look at the scalability. As said, there is no one-size-fits-all, but looking at all the differences, how can we build and come up with an approach to building early warning systems in FCV. So the timeline, we're working already on the white paper through interviews, literature review, and the aim is to have it ready by June 2024, and it will be presented at the Understanding Risk Conference in Imaging. And then we're also planning to have this task team tool, which will help really the task teams through a decision tree or a matrix. So we are still working on that. And yeah, so just to come back on what is the framework for us to achieve this, to make this study very useful. Basically, we are looking at the different pillars, and also we have the cross-cutting issues, which are institutional framework and governance. So this is really cross-cutting because it serves as a link between all the four pillars. So in case of weak institutions who already have issues in some of the pillars, so this is what we're trying to look at, have a holistic approach, how to be opportunistic, if I might say so, finding solutions, how, for instance, gathering Earth observations can bypass the need for working stations, for instance, and be able to support the community. So this is in a nutshell what we are doing, and we are really much looking forward to the deep dive sessions and gathering all your knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Moussa.
Thank you, Moussa. And so we're going to move on to a sort of a lightning round of presentations spanning 4 regions. So we're going to start with South Sudan, then Yemen, Haiti, and then last but not least, Afghanistan. The purpose of this portion of our discussion is really to provide some of the examples in which World Bank operations have provided some support to the early warning systems value chain. What are the impacts and what are some of the challenges that have been faced there? So let me invite Lucas Lochner, disaster risk management specialist working on South Sudan, and Laura Bonzanigo, the senior water specialist responsible for the regional project that involves also South Sudan, to speak about the experience of the country. And then following that, we're going to move on to Yemen, where Felipe Mercote, who's here with us in the room, will be presenting the efforts of the World Bank as well as partners on increasing the capacity of early warning systems in some Yemeni communities. After that, Naraya, is Naraya connected? Yeah. Okay. All right, good. Okay, sorry. So Naraya Carrasco is a senior disaster risk management specialist based in Port-au-Prince. Will be presenting the Haiti experience. And then finally, Arati Bell, who's here with a senior disaster risk management specialist, will be speaking about Afghanistan. So Lucas, over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Actually, Laura will start on our side, and I'll come in on the second slide. Can you, yeah, I see you have the presentation up, so if you could go to the next slide, and I'll hand it over to Laura.
Thank you so much, and can you hear me fine? Yeah, okay.
Yes,
thank
we
you.
can.
So thanks so much for inviting us from South Sudan to present about our experience. And so maybe a couple of words to introduce the country and South Sudan, which is not just a FCV country, but is also a very new country. Independence was declared in 2011. And after that, from 2013 to 2020, was devastated by a horrible civil war. So the peace process just started in 2020, and the country has been relatively more stable only for the last 3 years. A lot of so basically after the war and independence, there's a lot, all the institutions that have to be rebuilt. There's a lot of know-how from Sudan when it was one country that got lost during the war. And that's a bit the context that we are working in. In addition, in 2019 to 2022, the country was devastated by the worst flood we ever seen in decades. And that really, let's say, instigated a shift from emergency and humanitarian response towards a better disaster preparedness. That also means that a lot of donors and development partners started investing in South Sudan and accompanying the government, which has very little capacity to coordinate all these efforts. And so all these resources come in and with very little coordination. So what we are trying to do, online has an echo. Okay, I'm not sure you can fix. What we are trying to do, and just allow me just to do a few more words. With our portfolio at the World Bank, we have two projects, the ECRP, the Enhancing Community Resilience and Local Governance Project, phase 2, which is led by Urban, and the Regional Climate Resilience Project, which is led by Water. And we are working very closely together to support the government and to move from a UN sort of third-party implementing agency towards a government-led implementation. And the RSRP is the first project that is fully government-led. So the ECRP is really laying the ground with a lot of pilots, especially at the community level, that we are taking up in the RSRP for strengthening institutions and working more and complementing the local level intervention with national level institutional strengthening. And so basically what we are doing is all these activities on hydromet and early warning system, we are doing it together. And what we are investing a lot of time and effort right now is to sort of slow down all these initiatives until the government has a clear vision of where they want to get, what are the needs. For example, in South Sudan, there are only 5 working hydromet stations in the whole country and 2 more or less working. There's very little data, there's no repository, and the government is flooded with these funds for improving the data, improving the hydromet system, improving the early warning. So with Lucas and both the DRM and the water colleagues, we are trying to convene a roundtable and really slow down and make sure that the government can have a vision with which it can absorb all these different development initiatives to work towards a common goal and more coordination. And I will pass now over to Lucas that will show some example of these activities that we are coordinating. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone in the room and connected online. Could you go to the next slide, please? Great, thank you. So, as Laura mentioned, we are really working across GPs in South Sudan in response to the latest floods on these 2 respective projects. And we're very fortunate to have a grant under the CRUISE East Africa. This is the Climate Risk Early Warning System, which, as you may know, is funded by the World Bank, GFDRR, together with WMO and UNDR. And this CRUISE East Africa grant is really about strengthening hydromet and early warning services in the East Africa region with the aim to scale up early warning systems and improve the coverage of impact-based early warning services across several countries in East Africa, including South Sudan. And this activity just started to the end of last year, and it's a 4-year project led by WMO together with UNDR with 2 GPs, so GPERL, Urban Resilience Disaster Risk Management Land, and GP Water. And it's really one element where we can coordinate across GPs to see how we can support our respective government counterparts in the project in better addressing some of the challenges that Laura has laid out. So it's a $7 million project, of which 845,000 are allocated for South Sudan, and under the World Bank, we're implementing activities worth about 400,000. Essentially, and if you recall the image that Musa presented about the value chain in early warning systems, we're really trying to work from different ends. So on the one hand, strengthen the institutional capacities in the different ministries. And one challenge, as Laura has mentioned, is that these mandates, these responsibilities are quite fragmented. So we want to start off with getting a better understanding, taking stock of, what is the actual existing hydromet monitoring system, and supporting our respective government counterparts in the Ministry of Water, but also in the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management in developing a roadmap, bringing the different agencies together that are coming in to support the government, and really develop a very clear sequencing of tasks, of activities on how they can reach their own objective of just strengthening preparedness for floods and other disasters. I want to focus on one activity in particular, which is actually implemented under the ECRP2, which is the South Sudan Enhancing Community Resilience and Local Governance Project, under which we are trying to establish local governance institutions in a country where there's a large disconnect between the federal level and the communities. And as we see here on this picture, this is from one of the latest floods. Many of these communities are really.
Go to the park and she caught a mouse the day.
Nice.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
She's obsessed.
Or there's.
Yeah, bet.
Sorry, can you turn off the mic, please? So, yeah, sorry about that. So you see here, the communities are really left alone to fend for themselves. And part of it has to do with the fact that there's just very little dissemination of early warning information down to the communities. It's a challenging context overall because of the very flat topography in South Sudan, meaning that while these are often slow onset floods, but at the same time, these are protracted floods. And many of these areas have in fact been flooded over months and even years at a time and have remained inaccessible. But there are some areas, like in the east around Pibor town, for instance, where there is a bit more steeper terrain, and where we've seen some examples of community level early warning actions actually being taken. So through very simple means of communication, downstream municipalities are being warned about flash flooding. And we're piloting an action which aims to really develop a community level impact-based flood early warning, looking at the potential impacts of these floods, doing modeling around flood exposure and especially vulnerability of some of these poor communities, and piloting some of these actions that can really try to provide more effective early warning. And in addition, really from the other end of the value chain, helping establishing these institutions and really developing roadmap to strengthen these hydromet monitoring systems. So with that, I think that's just a glimpse. We're at very early phase of implementing this grant. And I think on our side, we also have to do a better job at coordinating with our implementing partners. So it's not just the government that is overwhelmed, but it's also us within the World Bank and the different partners. So we are really at early phase of engaging with WMO and UNDR on these tasks, but we look forward to moving forward on this. So thanks again for the opportunity to share some of these experiences. And yeah, I look forward to the discussion. Thank you. Back over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. My name is Felipe Flores. I'm a disaster risk management specialist in the MENA region, and I'm hoping to share a story of what it is to not only work in Yemen, but based on more recent events, talk about what happens there, how does early warning happen, especially in a conflict, an active conflict. So I think this is not the most precise map in the world, but I think it is probably the most important of the map of the various pictures I'm going to show today. No? it shows a country that is divided significantly between different groups. No? And each one of these groups has not only different capacities, they have different legitimacy internationally and locally. And with and also different access to, for example, to international funds, and that goes a lot with this background of the information that's on the right, no, of like of the war, right? Like of the toll that 10 years of war has brought to the lives of the people that live in this institutional environment. No? So on the other side, and I suppose this is the second part, the other side of the coin, no, is a bit of the exposure and the vulnerability of disasters, of natural hazards that the country faces. So Yemen suffers from floods, mostly. And more recently, it's had exposure to cyclones, which is something that had not happened or was not happening as often as it now. No? Later, I'll go into what I hope to be like a case study, and I can describe what happened. No? But of the big floods, no, we've had in 2020, we had one in 2022. And they affected the western areas of the country, which are the most populated, and which is a mountainous area. The rest of the country is a lot more desertic. No? I was also hoping, as you can see right now, these hazards, and these disasters also have a different dimension in a conflict zone. That we've encountered while we actually start designing operations and move ahead with what we do. No, one of the big ones is every time there's a disaster, we do see that these affect the displaced populations. Like they are the most vulnerable. They don't have any shelter to them is complicated, not difficult to obtain, and they do. For example, and I'll talk later about the most recent cyclone, but it was something that they were disproportionately affected. Another item is, for example, the explosive remnants of war. What happens when there's a giant flood, and what happens with those remnants, and for example, maybe the relationship that has with agriculture, right? Something also interesting is in the case of Yemen, no, the climate projections also indicate that the country is going to start seeing a lot more rain, right? Being now a relatively arid place, those areas that are most populated, those mountains, will see significant higher variations of rainfall. And apart from what we generally see as climate change related changes, which is variations in temperature and also storming. No? So my next slide is on the most recent disaster. No? This is the first time, and I think 50 years or more, that the country gets hit directly by not a tropical storm, but a cyclone. No? Cyclone Tej hit just around the time that other geopolitical events were happening, and it got a little bit less attention in the media, but it did hit the country head on. No? It hit the island of Socotra, which is an island close to the coast of Somalia, but that is governed by, that is part of Yemen. No? Together with support of the GFDRR, we were able to quickly mobilize, and we were able to find the damage estimates for the cyclone, which hits the island as the equivalent of a Category 3 using the Atlantic measuring system, and then as a Category 1 when it got to the mainland. No? And it is with this I go back to my comments on the different capacities and the different legitimacies that, for example, different regions have. The cyclone hit an area that is closer to Oman. No? So it hit the east of the country. And, for example, we can see that these authorities in the two regions, no, in Hadramaut and Al-Marra, they were able to provide some semblance of an early warning. No? This came due to the fact that, and this is something very important of operating in a conflict environment, is that even though there is a war things still happen, right? Like life still goes on. These institutions have some functioning, and at least these areas that were controlled by the international recognized government were able to mobilize and actually provide warning to their fishermen, close schools, and etc. And so with this background, no, and then comparing the cyclone relative to the floods of 2022, no, warning did not happen in those floods. No? Why? No, like, and also it goes into the fact that like it was in these, for example, in the green areas of like those areas have significantly less capacity, has significantly less access to funding, no, and then they have a different legitimacy with the population and like the responsibility they would get from the population, right? So since we're operating and we have an investment operation there, no, called USEP 2, our approach is to first understand all of those different areas, how they function, no? And try to first understand how the Met agency actually is working. No? Like we even, as the World Bank, had a project before with the Met agency, and then with the war, it stopped. No? The Met agency still exists. It operates nationally. It helps the entire country, even if it's divided. So like we just need to know, and this is something that I don't think anyone knows, is how these different areas relate to the Med agency. Can the Med agency actually be part of a World Bank project maybe after this closes? We don't know. So with the support of the GFDRR, we have a grant, and this is our attempt at solving and answering that question, right? And so this is starting. We're actually in the process of mobilizing the series of firms that are going to do this, in the sense that like they're hired, they have relationships with local institutions, and we hope to get an understanding of how this works. And I'll stop here, and I think the text in the slide speaks for itself, no? But and I'm glad that maybe we can discuss a little bit more of these types of findings and these lessons and when we have the breakout rooms. No? But thank you very much, and apologies if I went over the 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we pass it on to Naraya? Yeah. Is Naraya?
Yeah.
Okay, over to you, Naraya.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, perfect. So I'm Naraya Carrasco, Senior Disaster Management Specialist based in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And so in early warning system in Haiti, we have been supporting the country to develop early warnings for several years, not without challenges. Just to give you the context, since 2018, the fragility and turmoil in Haiti have increased. 2021 was a pivotal year with the assassination of the president Moïse Juvenel, with potential elections to be held maybe in August 25th. This date keep changing, so we don't know when we're going to have elections. It's already 4 years. The same year in 2021, there was a 7.2 magnitude earthquake striking the Southern Peninsula, causing 1.6 billion in damages and losses, followed by Tropical Storm Grace just a few days, jeopardizing the response. All of these with main roads from the capital to the affected area controlled by gangs, jeopardizing the humanitarian assistance. Since then, the situation is just worsening day by day. Half of the population is in need of humanitarian assistance and protection. And just yesterday, all flights in and out from Port-au-Prince were canceled because of gang shooting at the airport. I spent my morning trying to get out of the country Jean-Noël, who is a consultant working on early warnings in Haiti. So hopefully he will be in the flight at 2:31, leaving Port-au-Prince to his home. So that's part of the job of doing these type of things in Haiti. So this was to give you an idea of the challenges we can encounter in Haiti, where the population is really in need of multi-early warning systems. So currently, with the Strengthening DRN and Climate Resilience Project, we are developing the early warning systems with the protocols for 3 hydromet hazards, following the 4 pillars of the early warning for all. And we're also building multifunctional emergency shelters for people to go to. So in the next slide. So operating in this environment comes with specific challenges for early warning. On the technical and financial side, the government institutions in charge of early warning system are weak, with few staff and low technical capacity. Purchasing equipment and having spare parts can be difficult. Containers can be stuck at the port for several months, and this is also due to gang activity and other reasons. And there are no funds or enough staff to do maintenance of equipment in the field or to have a 24/7 vigilance. Connectivity is unreliable to send data, and not to mention vandalism and looting of hydromet stations. Rain drain is also a problem with the trained staff from the government leading the country. The population itself is also confronted to many daily challenges, making it difficult to implement information and education programs. The population is worried with other pressing needs and managing daily emergencies. Coordination is also a challenge, where there are several organizations from the UN, the UNDRR, us, the World Bank, bilaterals, NGOs, all wanting to help, and despite multiple efforts, coordinations remain a challenge. Other operational challenges include the constrained mobility due to gang activity. Moving in Port-au-Prince or to the provinces put you at risk of being kidnapped and can be life-threatening. So movement are limited. Lack of fuel, also affected by gang activity, does not help in a country where there is no reliable energy system. Sometimes organizing a simple face-to-face meeting is not possible. And government staff don't necessarily have access to reliable communication. It can also happen that you encounter corps when the technical team is installing hydromet stations. Despite all of these, we are making some progress, moving slowly, but moving forward. So we have been providing continuous institutional and technical support and expertise over several years, and not only on early warnings, but in DRM as a whole, for more than 10 years. So a success was the upgrade in 2020 of the civil protection to a general directorate, providing more autonomy to the institution in charge of preparedness and response, including early warnings. More support is needed for the hydromet unit, which is not yet autonomous and has no budget line. Continuous technical assistance and expertise are key, and they need to be flexible, including the firms that work in this sector. We are also enhancing the capacities of these institutions. For example, by training staff of the hydromet unit on weather, climate, and hydromet data management, or bringing members of the civil protection to the regional CIMEX in Panama that took place last June, where there were also aspects of early warning systems included. We are also trying to engage local communities in hydromet maintenance by creating a local network to secure hydromet equipment and conducting first-level maintenance. In addition, we are fostering public-private partnerships with Digicel, a mobile phone company, supporting the implementation of DWIN to distribute the messages. We are also promoting public awareness. A good example is a communication campaign during the 2020 cyclone season. And currently, we are planning a second campaign to educate the population on the importance of the new multi-hazard early warning system and how to respond to the alerts. Overall, to make things happen, we need to be perseverant, optimistic, even in these dire situations, flexible, and have access to trust funds. For that, thank you, GFDRR. And also to have good experts that know the context and are not afraid to come to Haiti. So with this, I just want to thank you for your attention, and I want to thank the consultants working with me, Viviana Sandoval, Jean-Noël Degrasse, who are particularly focusing on this, and Ali Alwati, who is probably in the room, who is also helping us with the construction of the multi-functional emergency shelters. Thank you so much.
Hey, I'm a senior disaster risk management specialist. I was previously in the South Asia region, have moved recently to Africa East, and today I'll be talking about Afghanistan. This is a snapshot in time, really, because this is a country which started out, which is FCV. I mean, the case. I mean, I won't go into the FCV situation in Afghanistan. I'm sure everybody here knows the long decades of conflict, the brief period in which there was a sort of stalemate. I can't even call it like a democratic situation. There were elections and so forth, but there was always sort of continuing conflicts. And even at the time where we were operating, almost 2/3 of the country was with the non-government entities, Taliban and others. And then, of course, it all came crashing down in August of 2021, and the political situation changed. Should I just move it here? Okay. So again, in terms of the country context, a very, very vulnerable country, extremely high degree of poverty, extreme food insecurity, and all the technical challenges that my colleagues have previously mentioned in other FCV contexts. So one advantage of going last is I won't have to tell you all the things that don't work, because it's probably the same in all these contexts. But what was important in this particular case was the driver of our engagement. We had already started engaging with the government with a very sort of nascent institutional setup, very low capacity, but being sort of almost starting at the ground level, but having a lot of sort of local interest and ownership, and that was very interesting. So there were a lot of young people in Afghanistan in positions in the government, and they were interested in moving ahead at that point in time. And then the main sort of point of attention for us was the 2018 drought that started in 2018, but really did not gain much attention till, I mean, and this is true for FCV context, everybody knew there was a drought happening. There was a lot of information, FuseNet, partners, government, everybody knew the drought was happening. But it was not until people actually moved to the provincial governors outside his office, and the governor calls up the president and says, I have 40,000 people outside, I need to feed them, what do I do? So it's then that the Ministry of Finance reached out to the bank, and that's how we got involved in a very comprehensive way. I'm not sure why part of the heading is missing, but basically the two pillars for the bank were the NETAF project, which was an investment program that was initiated through dialogue with the Ministry of Finance and the bank, leading a multi-partner engagement. And then again, thanks to GFDRR, robust trust, technical assistance supported by the crews and GFDRR trust funds. These two pillars really put together or held together the work that we did on early warning. NETAF, which means resilience in Dari, was an early warning, early action, early finance three-component investment that was prepared. And the focus was on addressing food and nutritional security with a focus on developing early warning hydromet services and community resilience. The chain, that Mubali chain that Musa mentioned earlier on early warning, is reflected in what this is. I won't go into all the details here, but this really was the grounding that we did. There was a lot of work that went into this, the various parts of this chain, in putting together a drought early warning system, in ensuring the discussion within the government on how drought declaration could be done, in having a dialogue on how early warning communication would be done, using many interesting ways, not just, so for example, the Met service, you would use Facebook very regularly. Facebook and WhatsApp were their tools of communication, and that was done quite well. And then, of course, a lot of work on the governance side and on the institutional arrangements involving 6 separate ministries. Basically, to put it shortly, a lot of work went in. A lot of talking, a lot of work, a lot of partner engagement. But what we were able to do was put together the Afghanistan Drought Early Warning Decision Support System. This was a cloud-based Google Earth Engine-driven system developed with our partners, IFPRI. This used global remote sensing satellite information, seasonal forecasting from the global centers, GFS, ECMWF, and with specific seasonal forecasting from IMD in the Indian Meteorological Department. And that was automatically fed into the system. And then with information drawn from whatever was available in Afghanistan. They had sort of about 20 odd stations. Sorry, there's an echo there. And then a few and a sort of hydrological monitoring equipment, which was being invested on by another of the World Bank projects. So using almost everything that we had, we put together this cloud-based platform. One key success was because we had that whole drought engagement going in parallel, we were able to bring all our partners together in parallel with this development. So we had sometimes bi-weekly, monthly training sessions. So they were all in on the development of the system, which is why the ownership was much stronger. The idea also was not who owns the system. That was the other thing, that this would be open data. All the concerned ministries would have full access to it. So this whole issue of which agency has the data and does not have the data did not come about. I mean, this was a well-functioning system at the, one of the key issues was who to hand it over to. Pre-government change, it was going to be with these 6 ministries, but post-government change, it was the discussion was to move it to WFP. Again, like I said, it's a snapshot in time. I'm not after a sort of a hiatus. The bank is re-engaging on this area, so I'm not sure about the current status there. I'll move on quickly. The AFTU's system allowed the bank and the team, the government, to produce bulletins on a weekly basis during that ongoing drought. This was sent to a wide-ranging set of stakeholders, NGOs, partners, and this addressed a key issue which contributed to the problem that the drought monitoring earlier had. There was no agreement between the government and the partners like FuseNet and so forth on where the drought was most vulnerable. There were multiple competing reasons. This bulletin really brought together and allowed everybody to have a common understanding of the situation. So it was very critical. In parallel, along with the sort of early warning piece, what the bank was doing through the NETAF and AFACLI was to establish a community-based CRM pilot program that was also using the GeoNode work that was done previously. And the reason this was very important was this was going to be working with the community development committees and also would have been a channel for dissemination of early warning. I won't go into a lot of it. Suffice it to say that we got a lot of good material in terms of lessons, methodology, using of very interesting tools, setting up of this GeoNode in the Ministry of Reconstruction Development to develop district-level profiles of hazards, and then working with the communities to be able to update that information with local knowledge. The third part of this broader program was to support the hydromet services. We were able to develop a roadmap, develop a hydromet atlas, and strengthen start to initiate to strengthen the flash flood guidance system. By bringing in Afghanistan through to the Central Asian Partnership, where the flash flooding area was in terms of the Amud Darya Basin. So a lot of interesting work went on during this time. What really was interesting was the insights were that you don't have to fear using ICT global and sort of innovative technologies to be able to work in FCV contexts. If you have local leadership and if you have a clear understanding of why you're doing something rather than it being supply driven, meeting the needs of a particular country and the service that is needed. In this case, the drought was very clear. We needed to know which district the social protection team could provide grants to communities in which way. So it was, you needed to know what you want, and that was a very clear reason why we went in. Second, it takes a lot more work, but a number of different programs existed in Afghanistan, whether it was the social protection team's work or whether it was the social development work, which was building the CDCs, or whether it was the water sector work that was sort of helping, did some early investment in hydromet, or the agriculture side. So bringing together these different parts of the portfolio and making sure that our work could feed into all of that was also very important. And lastly, we looked at, as I already mentioned, when there was a government, we worked with the government. When there was a period where there was issues working with the government, we worked with regional entities, including the South Asia Hydromet Forum. So even though the bank couldn't work directly with Afghanistan at that point in time, the agencies and institutions were connecting to the South Asia Hydromet Forum and getting hydromet early warning information. So we could continue that access. And then working, so not just in terms of the regional platform, but also working with our partners on the ground like FAO and WFP. I'll stop here and hope. Thank you.
So just as an anecdote, yesterday we had a chat with Arati about the paper to learn a little bit more about the Afghanistan experience, and it felt like we could interview her for a whole week and we will not get the end of it. Thanks a lot. So maybe let's turn to the room, and if you all have any questions to any of the panelists, please feel free to come either here to the podium so that everyone else can hear you. And then we spend 5 minutes on the questions, and then we move to the breakout groups, if that's okay. Yeah, Jay. Yes.
Should I go out or just to?
So can you hear him without him coming all the way to the podium? If not, come here. Yes. Yeah, there's supposed to be mics. Yeah, everyone's mics on. Okay. Yeah, you can. You can speak.
Okay. I'll just speak up just to make sure. I have. My name is Jay. I'm from the FCV group. I have a question about the Yemen capacity assessment. So, to me, if to make a good assessment about capacity, I think we have to think about what is written, what is said, and then what is seen. So what is written, meaning there's a written rule or not. What is said is, even if there's not written rule, we do have some units or system in charge of those EWS. Or we do not have a rule simply. We do have a rule, but actually we do not have a capacity to do that. Lastly, although what is said or what is written, if it's not really happening on the ground, we may say that the capacity is very low. In terms of the context of the Yemen, because we have, there are not only one government, and then we have a different level of engagement of the 4 different parties. So my question is, how do you ensure the quality of this kind of capacity assessment in this very, very fragile and also the different level of engagement? And how did you manage it, and how you plan to manage it to make such a quality assurance of the assessment?
So hope that everyone can hear. So yes, you're right. No, like it is incredibly complicated to not only move around Yemen, but also. Thank you. So on capacity, and then and also and how do we measure the in these different areas and these different like authorities, like how well are they able to do the response? How good are they at monitoring? our experience in Yemen has been quite varied in the different technical assistance we've had. No, depends on the topic as well. But like our approach is, we have a system now. We have a project now that is, and since it's Yemen, we have to implement through the United Nations, in which through that program, through that reconstruction program, impartially we are able to show that like we want to work in the entire country. That has opened the door for us to, for example, discuss in various locations, geographic locations of the country, with the different authorities, and then discuss what actually that happens and what do they respond and what, because as you rightly mentioned, the law says something. The law is written for a national government, and like it's very interesting to actually understand the de facto behavior of these different institutions, and especially because a lot of them have different degrees of funding. Like it's interesting to see that since it is a conflict zone, a lot of the funding comes from the international community. Like which ones have access to the tools you need to respond, to the tools you need to actually provide the warning. That is the big question that we're trying to find. And our solution has been that. Like, and that is, I think, is probably the most important message that I would like to transmit today. Is that you have to work in these settings with things that work. In the sense, like if you try to reinvent the wheel, then if it's like throwing the baby with the bathwater. If that's you having and operating through these channels, is probably the best shot we have of actually understanding what's there. And it is very difficult to understand what's there. Like we as the bank can't go to Yemen. We depend on other people to look at what's happening in the country. And we also depend on the ability of these NGOs to actually get good relationships locally with institutions like universities, like think tanks. These people still there. There's people with knowledge and people with a lot of PhDs on metrology, etc. Like just a question of accessing them. But I hope that answers your question and at least the solutions we have. But thanks.
Thanks a lot. Yes, please.
My name is Felix Lung. I'm a social protection specialist, and I work in West Africa, in the Sahel mostly. So I work, support teams in Chad, Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali. So I can very much relate to a lot of the challenges that have been that you have described. And so on the social protection side, we're mostly a user, obviously, of the early warning systems. We support large adaptive social protection systems in countries that use early warning systems in order to then be able to respond rapidly to shocks and support affected households from it. However, although we're a user, we actually have started working a lot on what is in the early warning sphere because of lack of data, because the institutions are weak, and what we have found ourselves doing often, and literally in all of the countries that I just named and others as well, is we end up using remote sense data to approximate situations in the ground, for droughts, for floods in particular. That's kind of the biggest shocks that we're looking at. What I noticed, however, in all of the countries, we're doing very similar work. So, and we're supporting the governments with doing very similar work. And this really strikes me, and so it's a question really to the entire panel. It strikes me as some work that is very easily generalized. It could be mainstreamed, and it could be made available to people on the ground from a central hub a lot more efficiently and effectively than is the case right now. So, and I wonder whether or not an institution such as GFDRR would not be excellently placed really to provide a platform, as for example in agriculture, there is now what's called GASPS. Yeah, yes. So they have a they have it's a platform that it's a global platform tracking food security. It's I only read about it recently. It's very impressive, and they're using all sorts of different data. And of course, every country is different. The indicators to be used are different. Thresholds to be used are different. But nonetheless, I think if we had such a mechanism, such a platform that would just collect the data, aggregate it appropriately, and that would be where we would be able to go to governments and just say, well, why don't you use this? And maybe we could, of course, it would have to be adjusted, and there would have to be made some technical system which would to be provided in order to make it operational. But I think this would be a huge, especially in FCV settings, this would be a huge advantage, because otherwise the data and the early warning to obtain it in a reliable, in sufficient quality fashion is often very good. Thanks.
Thank you, Felix. Who from the panel would like to answer this question?
Yeah,
yes.
I can give it a shot. So yes. Yeah, thank you. Shall I come over?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your question. And obviously, we all agree on the need for harmonization, but we already need to be careful not to replicate too many things. At the regional level, for instance, the Sahel, which I know, we have Agrimet, which is already working on the cadre harmonisé, the way they call it, is they provide some kind of seasonal forecast as part of the outlook, and also the track the food security. So maybe an initiative here would be to strengthen the capacity of these local institutions rather than thinking about a hub again, because I think there is a lot of capacity. For instance, the FSRP, the Food System Resilience Project, is working already with Agrimet, and they're trying to strengthen the capacity of these institutions. So fully agree on your points and the need to harmonize, but then there are already channels there through, for instance, the WMO, the regional climate centers. So maybe we need to look into that, because these institutions, they have better access to the national meteorological services. And every year, I think every 6 months, Agrimet organizes restitutions with the national meteorological services. So I think maybe that's the way to look at it. That's at least that's my understanding. I have worked with Agrimet a lot of time, and there's like really a hub for excellence in the region. So maybe that's who we might take on this question. Now I don't know if it's.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I have worked a lot with Agrimet too, and so the cadre harmonisé is a very complicated instrument that is. Which is essentially IPC. For those who don't know, it's basically the equivalent of the IPC Sahel region, but the data is often not of sufficient quality to work well with, and certainly not to do any kind of long-term analysis with. And Agrimet data, the data that comes from Agrimet is often not publicly available, and we end up very often. What I also see others doing, we end up working with public data. We end up working with using data that is available from public sources, recompiling everything, recomputing everything, re-aggregating everything, doing all the analysis again from scratch, because the work, the collaboration that we do with Agrimet, for example, and then also in other regions, we've done similar things with APAC, for example, is where I think it would just be. I agree. We don't. Of course, it's a tricky situation. But if you had a central platform that would just use the data that's available and make it available in a useful fashion to people who use it, I think that would be a huge value.
Can I maybe use the Pakistan example? Because again, there we were using what's publicly available. But I think the question is not so much that the data is not available. The question is, how do you want to use it for the purpose that you're using it? And oftentimes we get into this sort of cycle of getting, consultants or others to customize something that's really a complicated system that the government will not be able to use, or work with the regional. So at the end of the day, what we really need is a dashboard, because the user just needs a dashboard. So if you can make it simple and get a dashboard, and then the back end use as much of it is through whichever source that you can get publicly. Then your battle is half won, right? Because then you're working with things in a way that's customizable easily by the user. That dashboard is all they're looking at. And the back end, you're getting all this information that is publicly available. So, I mean, I would urge a lot of times we ourselves in the bank, we have data teams that they have a lot of support. We reach out to them all the time to get, so even for the afternoons, we reached out to them to get us support, for example, on flow forecasting and how to incorporate that. So we have those that capacity in the bank. The question is, I mean, GEMS is a good platform. There are others that where you could think of using a simple dashboard to be able to reach your final user. I would, yeah. So.
Yeah, if I can briefly add to this from my point of view, I think we have, from GFDR's point of view, to engage with you on this and see how maybe we can figure out to help you answer your information need. We do have technical skills and relations that have even deeper technical skills. Of course, the need you have is somewhat simpler to address than a lot of other early warning needs that are part of this conversation. So I would sense that a solution to the specific scalability SP operational challenge is something that certainly collectively within the institution we can probably help figure out. I agree that WMO and others coming top down comes pretty close to having efficient ways of, maybe there's still elements of manipulating what they can get to in order to make it useful for you directly. And that's probably where we might fit in this. There's many other early warning needs that can't be addressed top down, and that's where all these conversations about it's all about the performance of the lack of performance of the governance systems and what that means in the tail end, and that's unfortunately much more complicated to deal with. So I'm trying to tell you have an easy problem.
Yeah, but it's also it's if you're in an FCV setting where maybe getting a more complicated solution in place just proves to be so difficult. Absolutely. This can be like a...
No, absolutely. I didn't mean, I was trying to make half a joke. I didn't mean to belittle it, by calling it easy. And I fully agree. If we can find problems that we believe we are in a position to help solve, we should solve those. It's because the whole foundation, what Musa was saying at the 10-point step, and what I was saying in the beginning, we already know that we have never come across an FCD country where anyone figured out how to make the 10 chains connect to each other.
So the regular country.
Non-FCD countries. We know that is an ideal. So yes, we're happy to engage with you and see how we can help.
Yeah, we can definitely take the conversation and kind of deepen the dialogue a little bit on this topic, because this is definitely something, one of the different venues we're looking at. How can we leverage the existing regional information to better be fit for the specific purposes of different investment programs that we have at the bank, but also communities' access to information. But it's definitely one of, it cannot all be regional involvement or a global data set, because we cannot be just providers of information. We also need to be demand driven, and we need to be very aware of the nuances of FCV. What's happening in the Sahel might not necessarily be the same in Myanmar or Yemen. The level of information, the level of complexity, the trust issues, of information that you're putting out there might be totally different, and that's where we need to that nuance in. This is such a fascinating conversation, but we need to move along because we have the second half of the event. But before we do, I'll pass it on to Katie, who's part of our team, to see if there are any questions online that have not yet been answered. There has been a very fascinating discussion on the chat that we will be sharing with you. But Katie, would you like to take over and maybe if there are any unanswered questions in the chat, if people can come forward and and bring the
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you. So a really lively chat online. Quite a few of the questions have been answered by various speakers, so thank you so much for that. A couple I just wanted to highlight in case the speakers wanted to add any further information. So one from Nagaraja Harshadip, who asked, how are we helping FCV countries to better leverage modern technologies for early warning, preparedness and recovery? Obviously that touches a little bit on the discussion that we were just having. There was also a question specifically for South Sudan from Hogan Park, who asks, given the relatively small size of the budget, how do you encourage government buy-in? And then the last one I just wanted to highlight in case any of the speakers wanted to reply to this, from Catalina Jamie, who asks, how is the bank ensuring that investments in early warning systems cover the entire value chain? And in particular, thinking about implementation by local organisations, particularly in high intensity conflict settings where those organisations are often the primary access point. So just a couple there to highlight from the online audience. Over to you.
Thanks, thanks, Lee. Please, are we muted? Are we good? Can you hear us? Yeah, okay. Any of the panelists would like to answer any of the questions? Maybe I'll start with the last one by Catalina. Thank you so much. You kind of hit the nail on the head because that's exactly what we're trying to figure out. So far, we have not. No, it's very, very difficult, like it was mentioned in the panel, to be able to implement the whole value chain. Like Artie said, in a regular setting, let alone in a conflict-affected setting. So we're trying to be, in a way, opportunistic here to try to figure out how we can use what's out there, what are the practices that we have, what is the situation on the ground, tailor some of the tools we have to reach as many people as we can with early warnings that are as accurate as we can. So that's a little bit what the purpose of this study is, recognizing that it's very, very difficult to do so by using sustainable measures that we can implement and try to build on over the years that we are engaging with our counterparts. So that's a little bit where the answer is actually we're trying, we're exploring very different options, but it's very, very difficult to do so. I don't know if anybody from the panelists would like to add anything about this question before we move on to maybe Harsh's question. Yeah.
Just one point, very practical, but in all countries that are on the FCS list, banks official FCS list, we have FCV coordinators who are part of the CMU. So that's I think a resource that task teams can rely on to better understand the FCV dynamics in country and also understand which stakeholder groups are important to engage with. And I mean, I think the presentation on Yemen was very interesting, that the point of understanding, okay, we have an agency that we can, technical people we can talk to, but how do we know who they have access to and who listens to them? And that understanding those dynamics in country, I think, is important.
Thank you, Bianca. Lucas and Laura, do you have anything you'd like to add on the South Sudan example in the regional project? We say your videos are on.
A couple of words.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the echo. Sorry. I think Lucas just posted it in the chat. So how actually in South Sudan in particular, the Bank Executive Trust Fund are able to leverage a much larger engagement. So it's 250 million, the regional project just for South Sudan, and I think around 50 million, but Lucas, correct me if I'm wrong, the ECRP2. So we have a very large IDA envelope, but really I think the main key for the ownership, and that's why we keep insisting on the fact that to slow down and make sure first there is coordination and a clear vision that look at the whole value chain so the government can strategize and be also a bit opportunistic of who finds which part of the value chain, and also have a clear understanding on the operation and maintenance cost once these tools or the systems are implemented. So it's, I think it's really not, at least in South Sudan, not a question on ownership. The government, especially after the floods of the last 3 years, really understands, it really wants to be able to better, have better warning and better preparedness. They are clearly committed. One of the challenges we have there is the lack of staff. For example, there is basically 2 people, I think, in the ministry that understand about hydromet and early warning system, and they're of course extremely stretched and mostly overwhelmed all the time. So again, for that, we are really insisting on this, like slowing down, go step by step, think about the whole chain, and think about all these offers that are being put on the table in front of them before they accept and move into implementation, all sort of different studies. And then one more point before, maybe I think Lucas, he wants to add something. So on the harsh question, so whilst we were preparing this operation, we were lucky enough to get support from the European Space Agency, and with that, we managed to start preparing some initial rough flood risk maps. That, based on the complete lack of data from the ground, was a very good initial approximation and did provide some information that the government and some partners are using. Of course, it has a lot of faults as well because it only relies on satellite observation. But it did add, and especially I think what was very nice to see was how that facilitated the discussions about the flood risk and where in specific areas. And they did manage to identify some of the areas that were more exposed and where some of the intervention were prioritized and started focusing there. And now, thanks to GFDRR, we are financing the scale up of this, which includes also a refinement of the global data set that are used in the tool, and also a big exercise on data rescue, because there's a lot of information that was compiled and collected when South Sudan was only one country. South Sudan didn't exist yet, and is now scattered in different offices. So the idea is to help this data rescue and recompile as much of information sort of collected from the ground in the past and put it in one water information management system that Lucas wrote in the chat. So we are just beginning. I think the challenges are a lot, but that's basically how we are trying to address some of the data, data gaps and capacity challenges in South Sudan. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura.
If there's time, Karima.
That Lucas? Maybe 1 minute before we move to the breakout groups.
Just very quickly, I want to highlight really the importance of these grants in our programs in South Sudan to help advance the agenda. In fact, when we first had an operation in South Sudan, it was entirely third-party implemented. And we're now in a situation where all our new programs are implemented by the government. This is a huge transition, of course, with quite a few challenges on capacity building. But over time, with support from GFDR, also the DRM-FCV group, actually, we've really helped advance this agenda. And I just want to highlight this particular point, this has really created great opportunities. So thanks to all the teams.
If you don't mind, whoever is going to be presenting the online breakout group restitution, please come forward. You have 2 minutes. Just give us a brief outline of what you have discussed, which seems to be quite a lot. And then we can move back to the room, and then we can close, because it's Friday afternoon and you all need to get some rest. Yeah. Go ahead. Yes. Well, let's start with the online.
Online. Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Katie, who from online would like to present?
So I think in the interest of time, it will be myself, if that's okay.
Okay. Fantastic.
So we had a broad conversation. We actually took the opportunity to ask some of the speakers some further questions, because we were lucky enough to have a lot of the speakers online. One particular theme that did come up quite a lot is the issue of trust. So obviously in fragile and conflict affected settings, particularly where formal government and formal institutions' relations with citizens may be quite fractured or fragmented, particularly where the social contract is broken down. Actually, this has really big impediments for how we communicate and disseminate risk information. So that was a big theme that came up quite a lot. And then the other thing that we spoke about quite a lot was really just sharing ideas for tools and data repositories. So a number of our online attendees shared in the links different online repositories which could be useful for thinking more about risk analytics. So particularly where we're thinking about layering of hazard and climate related data with other proxy indicators for conflict. So two themes that came out quite strongly.
Thanks a lot, Katie. Lara, do you want to?
I'll wrap up very quickly. I think the discussion was very rich. So I'll do my best. Yeah. We also actually raised the issue of trust quite a lot. In terms of challenges, we spoke a lot also about how to engage with some non-state groups that may not be recognized by the international community, the issues of ensuring the sustainability of solutions despite security situation with, of course, examples from Haiti. In terms of solutions, I think community-based DRM was quite broadly discussed for different aspects of the early warning system value chain, actually for disaster risk knowledge, for understanding what's really happening in the ground, but also in terms of engaging with non-conventional groups through maybe like partnering with different NGOs and UN agencies, but also for disseminating and communication of warnings. We also spoke about the need to build on larger programs that are happening in FCV contexts, to not be doing our work on our own, our little initiatives on early warning systems or hydromet on our own, but actually build on broader programs and partnering up with UN agencies and NGOs. So I think these are the main things from our discussion, very summarized.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Lara. Yeah, we're on a time crunch. That's why we just wanted to very briefly, let me just grab my notes. Yeah, just to say a note of thanks to everyone who's still here and everybody who connected. Thank you for the conversation. This was meant to really be a sort of a crowdsourcing of thoughts, ideas, and experiences on early warning systems and FCV countries. As we mentioned at the beginning, the objective of this is to feed into the report that we're working on, which targets the different approaches to early warnings in different FCV settings. We know that all FCV settings are very different, and we do need to acknowledge that. We want to know what works, what doesn't, and that's what's going to be governing a little bit our approach over the next couple of years, hopefully. This is the year where we're setting the analytical underpinning, and hopefully the idea would be to come up with operational support to TTLs that don't have to go through all of the pains that you went through in Yemen, that Lucas and Laura went through in South Sudan, but really come up with the most innovative solutions depending on the context that they have. So we've heard from a lot of countries. South Sudan, a young country with a lot of challenges in terms of development space, in terms of local government's relationship to the federal government. We've heard from Yemen, where there's an active conflict with all of the challenges that brings. Haiti, where there's an actual effective evacuation happening right now. It's a decade-long effort in establishing early warning systems, and we're still scratching the surface of it. And then finally, Afghanistan. The conversations were here extremely lively, and we cannot wait to integrate them into the report that we will circulate with you, acknowledging everybody's support and contributions. We will be presenting the report in UR. So if you are planning to be in UR in Himeji, please reach out to us. We will we'll make sure that we keep the conversation going up until then, and then during the understanding risk. And I'm leaving you here with a couple of resources. The first one is something that we wanted to do to, again, establish a common ground of what we mean by disasters in FCV countries and what is the relationship between disasters and fragility, conflict, and violence. And that's an OLC course. And then our colleagues in the inclusive DRM have worked on absolutely wonderful and informative early warning systems, inclusive and accessible early warning systems course that walks you through how to design an early warning system that actually can be inclusive from a gender perspective, from community engagement perspective, but also from accessibility perspective. And so these are the two courses that could be used by you, by your teams, but also by the PIUs and counterparts that you are engaging with. And then, of course, feel free to reach out to us at the Disaster-FCV Nexus group within GFDRR, and then we'll be able to engage with you, think through issues with you, and hopefully figure out solutions together. With that, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate the interest in this topic. And despite it being a Friday afternoon, we were not hoping for this much interest. So, I mean, we were hoping for this interest, but we're not expecting it. And so have a good weekend, and hopefully we'll engage with you soon. Bye. Bye, everybody online. Thanks, everyone here.